My name is Jessica Hamilton. I'm 30 years old, and the first time my biological parents fought this hard to claim me was when $5 million was attached to my name. They abandoned me when I was 6 months old, left me with my grandmother, and disappeared so completely that for most of my childhood, I thought parents was just a word other kids used when they talked about school pickups, birthday cakes, and family vacations. For 30 years, my grandmother was the one who fed me, raised me, took me to school, held my hand during fevers, clapped at my graduations, and made sure I never felt like a child somebody threw away. Then she died, and the house that smelled like her coffee, old books, lemon soap, and the roses she planted for me became painfully quiet. I thought grief would be the hardest thing I had to survive. I was wrong. 3 weeks after the funeral, a lawsuit arrived at my door. My parents, the same people who left me before I could even speak, were suing me for my inheritance, claiming I manipulated an elderly woman into leaving me her $5 million estate. When I walked into court, my mother rolled her eyes like I had already lost. My father leaned back with that smug little smile people wear when they think blood gives them ownership over everything they never earned. Then the judge opened the file, read one page, froze, and looked straight at me. "Wait," he said slowly. "You're the one they're suing?" That was the moment everything shifted, but not in the way my parents expected. Because what they didn't know was that my grandmother had prepared for this long before she died, and the truth she left behind was more powerful than any lie they could afford to put in a legal complaint. Before I tell you what he said next, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like there? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The lawsuit didn't feel real at first. I stood in my kitchen with the envelope open on the counter, my coffee going cold beside it, staring at words that turned my entire life into a legal accusation. Undue influence. Exploitation of a vulnerable elder. Unjust enrichment. The phrases looked clean and professional on paper, but underneath them was something rotten. Hannah Turner and Mark Turner, my biological parents, were telling a court that I had stolen from the woman who raised me, the woman who had chosen me every single day after they chose to walk away. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. Not because I was afraid of them taking the money, at least, not at first. I was afraid because they were trying to rewrite the only love story I had ever trusted. My grandmother, Barbara Harris, and my grandfather, William Harris, had never been rich in the flashy way people imagine. They drove old cars, clipped coupons, fixed broken appliances instead of replacing them, and treated every dollar like it had a purpose. But over decades, my grandfather had invested wisely. My grandmother had managed their rental properties with quiet discipline, and by the time they both passed, what looked like an ordinary estate had become worth nearly $5 million. I didn't even know the full amount until the attorney called. I remember whispering, "That can't be right," because the woman who left behind that fortune was the same woman who reused gift bags, washed plastic containers, and told me wasting food was disrespectful to everyone who had ever gone hungry. And then, before I had even finished grieving, Hannah and Mark decided the money had found the wrong person. I called Samantha Green, the estate attorney my grandmother had trusted for years. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension underneath when she said, "Jessica, I need you to listen carefully. They are not just asking for a share. They are accusing you of manipulating Barbara. They're claiming she was too weak to understand what she was doing." I almost laughed, but it came out like a broken breath. Grandma Barbara had been the sharpest person I had ever known. She could remember the birthday of a cashier she met twice, catch one wrong number in a bank statement, and silence a room with one sentence. The idea that I had controlled her was insulting enough. The idea that Hannah and Mark were pretending to care about her mental state after skipping her funeral made my stomach twist. Samantha asked me to gather anything that showed my real relationship with my grandparents: photos, letters, medical records, school forms, old cards, journals, receipts, anything proving that I had been there and that they had been there for me. I went to my grandmother's bedroom that night and opened the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Inside were baby blankets, report cards, birthday cards, handmade ornaments, and one yellowed envelope I had never seen before. My name was written on the front in her handwriting. Inside was a letter, not from her, but from Hannah. It was dated 2 weeks after I was born. The words were short, almost impatient. "We can't do this. We're too young. She cries too much. Keep her for now. We need our lives back." At the bottom, Mark had added one sentence: "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I sat on the floor with that letter in my lap, and something inside me went still. For years, I had wondered if maybe they had been desperate, sick, trapped, or heartbroken. That letter didn't sound heartbroken. It sounded annoyed. It sounded like I had been a problem they were relieved to drop off somewhere else. And now, 30 years later, those same people were telling a judge they were victims. Samantha told me the lawsuit also mentioned their financial hardship. Mark's business had failed after years of pretending he was more successful than he was. Hannah had credit card debt hidden behind designer bags, salon appointments, and fake smiles. Their home was close to foreclosure. They had already borrowed from relatives, drained savings, and burned through every excuse before finding my name in the probate records. Suddenly, their return made perfect sense. They hadn't come back for their daughter. They had come back for a payout. That night, I stopped asking why they didn't love me. I started asking how far they were willing to lie to get what they wanted, and whether I was finally strong enough to let the whole world hear the answer. Preparing for court felt like digging through the ruins of my life and labeling every memory as evidence. Samantha's office became a battlefield of cardboard boxes, folders, sticky notes, legal pads, and photographs spread across her conference table. On one side were Hannah and Mark's claims that my grandmother had been lonely, confused, dependent on me, and easily manipulated. On our side was the truth, but truth still needed proof. Samantha was careful with me, but she didn't soften the reality. "Their lawyer is going to make you look greedy," she said. "He's going to say you isolated Barbara from her real children. He's going to say you took advantage of her grief after William died. He may even say you poisoned her against them." I stared at her, stunned. "They weren't there to poison her against." Samantha nodded. "Then we prove that." We began with guardianship records showing that my grandparents had taken me in when I was 6 months old, and that Hannah and Mark had never petitioned to regain custody. We found school forms where Barbara and William were listed as emergency contacts, medical documents showing they had paid for my care, birthday cards from neighbors calling them my parents in every way that mattered, and old photographs from a lifetime Hannah and Mark had never bothered to enter. But the strongest evidence came from the journals. My grandmother had kept them for decades, not dramatic journals filled with secrets, but ordinary records of love. Jessica lost her first tooth today and insisted the tooth fairy needed a receipt. Jessica cried because a classmate said grandparents are not real parents. I told her love is not measured by age. Jessica got into college. William cried in the garage so she wouldn't see. Each entry was small, but together they became a wall my parents couldn't climb. The night before trial, I sat alone in Grandma Barbara's kitchen reading those journals until the words blurred. I could almost hear her voice in the room, firm and warm, telling me not to shrink. There was one entry from when I was 12 that broke me open. Hannah called today after 9 years, not to ask about Jessica, to ask whether we still had the old silver tea set. I told her Jessica was doing well in school. She hung up before I finished. I pressed my hand over my mouth because it hurt in a place I thought had healed. Not because Hannah had hung up. I had accepted long ago that she didn't want to know me. It hurt because my grandmother had carried that rejection quietly and still protected me from it. She had never let me feel like someone's unwanted burden. She had turned abandonment into bedtime stories, school lunches, piano lessons, scraped knee kisses, science fair projects, late-night talks, and Sunday pancakes shaped like hearts. I wanted revenge in that moment. Not the loud kind, not the cruel kind, but the kind where the truth stands up in front of everyone and refuses to be buried. Samantha also found copies of two old checks my grandparents had mailed to Hannah and Mark years earlier, both marked for Jessica's needs, both cashed, and neither followed by a visit, a call, a birthday card, or even a thank you. That detail changed something in me. They had not only abandoned me, they had accepted help in my name while refusing to know me. Then Samantha found one more thing. A notarized letter my grandmother had written 2 years before she died, addressed to any court that may one day question my decision. My hands trembled as Samantha read it aloud. Grandma Barbara had written that I was not a caretaker who appeared at the end of her life, not a stranger who influenced her during weakness, and not a greedy relative circling an estate. I was the child she had raised, the granddaughter she had chosen, and the family member who had stayed. She wrote, "If Hannah and Mark ever return after my death, ask them where they were when Jessica needed shoes, medicine, tuition, comfort, and love." I couldn't speak after hearing that. Even from the grave, my grandmother was still standing between me and the people who had hurt me. Samantha found me at the kitchen table the next morning, still holding the journal. "Are you ready?" she asked. I looked at the empty chair where my grandmother used to sit and thought about the baby Hannah had called too much, the child Mark had not wanted to make things harder for, and the woman they were now dragging into court. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm done being scared of people who only show up when there's money." If you were me, would you have walked into that courtroom quietly, or would you have made sure every lie was exposed? The courthouse smelled like floor polish, old paper, and nerves. I wore a simple navy suit, the one Grandma Barbara had helped me choose for my first big job interview years earlier. Back then, she had stood behind me in the mirror and said, "That color makes you look like you already know your worth." I needed that sentence more than ever as I stepped through security with Samantha beside me. Hannah and Mark were already there. Hannah wore black. Not funeral black, but performance black. The kind of outfit chosen to look wounded and respectable. Mark kept one hand in his pocket and the other on his phone, scrolling like this was an inconvenience between meetings. When Hannah saw me, she gave a small, theatrical sigh and rolled her eyes, as if my presence in my own inheritance case was childish. Mark leaned toward her and whispered something that made them both smirk. I didn't look away. That alone seemed to irritate them. Their attorney, David Miles, was exactly the kind of man I expected. Polished shoes, expensive watch, smile too smooth to be kind. He greeted Samantha with fake warmth, then glanced at me like I was a problem he planned to erase by lunch. When Judge Gregory Carter entered, everyone stood, and the room tightened into silence. He began by reviewing the case summary. I watched his eyes move across the page, calm at first, then slower. His brow furrowed. He turned another page, then another. Finally, he looked over his glasses, first at Hannah and Mark, then at me. "Wait," he said, voice cutting through the room. "You're the one they're suing?" David Miles shifted. Hannah's face hardened. The judge tapped the file. "This record shows the petitioners left the respondent in the care of William and Barbara Harris when she was 6 months old and made no documented effort to resume parental responsibility for nearly 3 decades. Is that correct?" David stood quickly. Your Honor, my clients dispute the emotional framing of that history. The judge's expression didn't change. I asked whether the record is correct. David hesitated. Broadly, yes. That one word felt like a door cracking open. Broadly. As if abandoning a baby could be softened by vocabulary. David gave his opening statement anyway. He spoke about biological rights, family bonds, regret, vulnerability, and alleged manipulation. He painted Hannah and Mark as young parents who had made mistakes, but had always cared from a distance. From a distance. That phrase almost made me stand up. Samantha's hand touched my arm under the table, grounding me. Then she stood and told the court the truth. That Barbara Harris had raised me, loved me, protected me, and made a deliberate, documented decision to leave her estate to the person who had been her daughter in every meaningful way. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every sentence landed with the weight of records, dates, signatures, receipts, and 30 years of absence. When it was my turn to testify, my legs felt unsteady, but my voice did not. I told the court I had no memory of being left at 6 months old, but I had lived with the consequences of it every day. I told them about birthday candles Grandma lit, school plays she attended, hospital chairs she slept in, and the empty spaces where Hannah and Mark should have been. I explained that my grandmother never taught me to hate them. She taught me to survive them. David tried to interrupt my rhythm during cross-examination. Ms. Hamilton, isn't it true that you lived in Barbara's home rent-free for years? I looked at him. I lived in my home as a child. A few people shifted in the courtroom. And isn't it true, he continued, that Barbara depended on you emotionally after William died? Yes, I said. We depended on each other. That's what family does. He smiled like he had trapped me. So, you admit there was dependency. I turned slightly toward the judge. I admit there was love. If their case depends on calling love manipulation, then they should have shown up sometime in the last 30 years to learn the difference. The room went still. Hannah's eyes narrowed. Mark stopped scrolling. David tried another angle. Did you ever ask Barbara about her will? No. Did you know you were the sole heir? No. But you accepted it quickly, didn't you? I swallowed, then said, I accepted that my grandmother knew what she wanted. That is not the same as celebrating her death. That answer wiped the smile off his face. For the first time since I walked in, my parents didn't look smug. They looked worried, and I realized the courtroom was no longer hearing their version of me. It was finally hearing mine. Samantha built our case like she was laying bricks in front of a storm. First came the guardianship documents, then the school records, then the medical bills, then the photographs. There I was at 5, missing front teeth, sitting on William's shoulders at a county fair. There I was at 12, holding a science trophy while Barbara cried in the background. There I was at 17, standing between both of them on graduation day, their faces glowing with the exhausted pride of people who had survived every hard season with me. Each photo made Hannah look smaller, not physically, but morally. She kept her chin lifted, but the jury could see what she had missed. Then Samantha introduced the journals. David objected, argued relevance, argued hearsay, argued everything except the truth. Judge Carter allowed selected entries because they showed Barbara's state of mind over many years. Samantha read them with steady control. Jessica asked today why her mother never visits. I told her some people are too lost to love properly, but that does not make her unlovable. My breath caught. I had never read that one. Samantha continued. William says we should start a college fund. I say we should start 2. One for school, one for whatever dream she is too shy to name. Then came the entry after my grandfather died. Jessica moved back temporarily to help me with the house. She says it is temporary, but I know she is afraid I will be lonely. She does not know she is the reason I am brave. I heard someone in the gallery sniffle. David stood for cross-examination with a folder in his hand and a confidence that felt rehearsed. Ms. Green has shown sentimental writings, he said, but sentiment does not prove capacity. Let's discuss motive. He turned toward me. Ms. Hamilton, you knew the estate was valuable, didn't you? I knew my grandmother's home was valuable to me, I said. That isn't what I asked. Then ask better. Samantha whispered my name, warning me, but Judge Carter's mouth barely moved, like he was suppressing something. David's smile thinned. He pulled out the old letter from Hannah and Mark, the one I had found in the cedar chest. This letter, written shortly after your birth, shows your parents were overwhelmed, not malicious. Young, struggling parents sometimes make temporary arrangements. Isn't it possible your grandparents took advantage of that temporary arrangement and kept you from your parents? Hannah leaned forward, eyes wet now, performing for the room. For one terrifying second, I understood the trap. They wanted to turn abandonment into sacrifice. They wanted the letter to sound like proof they had needed help, not proof they had walked away. Samantha stood. Your Honor, may the entire letter be read into the record? David hesitated. He had only planned to quote the first line. Judge Carter nodded. Proceed. Samantha took the page and read every word, including the parts David had skipped. She cries too much. Keep her for now. We need our lives back. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Silence spread like ice. Hannah's fake tears disappeared. Mark stared at the table. Samantha then presented call logs from Barbara's old records, showing only 3 contacts from Hannah in 20 years, none asking about me. One was about the silver tea set. One was about borrowing money. One was a wrong number she never corrected. Then Samantha presented the obituary notice and the timing of the lawsuit, filed 19 days after the estate value became public in probate filings. She also presented the 2 old checks my grandparents had sent years earlier, both cashed by Hannah and Mark, both labeled for my care. David objected again, louder this time. Judge Carter overruled him. Then Samantha called Hannah to testify. My mother walked to the stand like someone stepping onto a stage, but the script fell apart fast. Samantha asked, Can you name Jessica's elementary school? Hannah blinked. That was a long time ago. Can you name her high school? I was not kept informed. Can you name her birthday? Hannah's mouth opened, then closed. My chest tightened, but I didn't look away. Samantha's voice stayed calm. You are asking this court to believe you were a mother from a distance. So from that distance, can you tell us the date your daughter was born? Hannah whispered the wrong date, the wrong month, the wrong day. No one moved. Samantha turned a page. Mrs. Turner, did you attend Barbara Harris's funeral? No. Did you send flowers? No. Did you send condolences to Jessica? I was grieving privately. But 19 days later, you filed a lawsuit claiming Jessica stole money from the woman who raised her. Hannah's face flushed. That money should have stayed in the family. Samantha paused. Jessica is family. That sentence landed harder than any accusation. Mark testified after her, and did even worse. He tried to claim he had always intended to reconnect, but when Samantha asked why he waited until after the estate appraisal, he said, We didn't know what she had until then. It was the first honest thing either of them had said all day. David closed his eyes like a man watching a ship sink from shore. Then Samantha introduced my grandmother's notarized letter. David objected before she even finished describing it, but Judge Carter allowed it after reviewing the date, signature, and witness information. Samantha read the final paragraph aloud. If Hannah and Mark come forward after my death, let the court ask them what they came for. If it is Jessica, they will know her life. If it is money, they will know only mine. I felt the air leave my lungs. Hannah looked down. Mark's face turned red. In that moment, my grandmother was not a memory. She was a witness. I sat there feeling every year of silence rearrange itself into evidence. For once, their absence was not a wound I had to hide. It was proof. The ruling did not come immediately. Judge Carter called for a recess, and those 20 minutes felt longer than the 30 years Hannah and Mark had ignored me. In the hallway, Hannah tried to approach me. Samantha stepped slightly in front of me, but my mother raised both hands like she was harmless. "Jessica," she said softly, using my name like she had earned it. "This has gone too far." I almost laughed. It had gone too far when they left a baby behind. It had gone too far when they skipped every birthday, every fever, every graduation, every funeral. It had gone too far when they called my grandmother weak because she loved me better than they ever could. Mark stood behind her, jaw tight. "We can settle this right now," he said. "No need to embarrass anyone else." I looked at him for a long second. "You mean, no need to embarrass you?" Hannah's softness cracked. "You don't need $5 million. There it was. Not, "I miss you." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." Just money, dressed up as fairness. "And you needed a daughter only after you found out she had it," I said. Her face changed then, not into grief, but into anger. "After everything, you're still ungrateful." That word hit an old bruise, but it didn't break me. "Ungrateful for what?" I asked. "The silence? The lawsuit? The wrong birthday?" Mark grabbed her arm and pulled her back before she could answer. When court resumed, the room felt different. Even David Miles looked tired. Judge Carter took his seat and folded his hands over the file. "This court has reviewed the submitted documents, heard testimony, and considered the arguments. The petitioners have alleged undue influence, lack of capacity, and improper inheritance. They have not provided credible evidence supporting those claims." Hannah stared straight ahead. Mark's mouth tightened. The judge continued. "By contrast, the respondent has provided extensive documentation showing a long-standing familial relationship with the decedent, consistent caregiving, emotional closeness, and clear testamentary intent. Barbara Harris had the legal and moral right to leave her estate to Jessica Hamilton." My throat closed around a sob I refused to release. Judge Carter looked toward Hannah and Mark. "Biology alone does not create entitlement to an estate, particularly where the record shows decades of voluntary absence. This court will not reward abandonment disguised as concern." David's shoulders dropped. Samantha exhaled beside me. Then came the words I had needed without knowing how badly I needed them. "The will is affirmed. The petition is denied. The estate shall pass to Jessica Hamilton as written." For 1 second I heard nothing. No papers, no breathing, no movement. Just my grandmother's voice in my memory, telling me I already knew my worth. Judge Carter also ordered Hannah and Mark to cover a portion of my legal fees because their claims had been unsupported and filed in bad faith after probate disclosed the estate value. That part made Mark jolt upright. "Your Honor." David grabbed his sleeve, but it was too late. "This is outrageous," Mark snapped. "She turned them against us." Judge Carter's face hardened. "Mr. Turner, you would be wise to stop speaking." Hannah started crying then, but there was no performance left in it. It was panic. They had entered that room expecting to take what my grandparents built. They left owing money, exposed as liars, and stripped of the fantasy that they could erase 30 years with a legal complaint. A court clerk gathered the documents with quiet efficiency, but every movement sounded final. As people began to leave, I heard whispers from the hallway. Someone said, "They didn't even know her birthday." Someone else said, "And they sued her?" For years, my shame had lived in private. Their shame was now public, and I realized the truth did not need to shout to destroy a lie. Outside the courtroom, Mark tried one last time. Jessica, please. We're in trouble. I turned around, and for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. Not as the father I never had, not as the man whose absence I had once tried to explain, but as someone who had mistaken my pain for weakness. Hannah stood beside him, red-eyed and trembling. "We can start over," she said. "We're still your parents." I looked at both of them and felt something inside me finally unlock. "No," I said. "You're the people who left me. My parents were the ones who stayed." Mark flinched. Hannah whispered, "So that's it?" I nodded. "Today you didn't lose $5 million. You lost your last chance to pretend you ever deserved me." Then I walked away. I didn't slam a door. I didn't scream. I didn't beg them to understand. My revenge was simple. I let the truth stand in the open, and I refused to carry their shame for another day. After the ruling, silence became the first gift I gave myself. I blocked Hannah and Mark's numbers before I even reached the parking lot, but that didn't stop them from trying. Emails came first. Hannah wrote long messages about regret, family healing, and how grief had confused everyone. Mark's messages were shorter and sharper. "We need help. You can spare something. Barbara would want forgiveness." That last one made me stare at the screen until my anger cooled into certainty. Barbara would have wanted many things. She would have wanted me to eat when I was sad, sleep when I was exhausted, wear a coat even if I said I was fine, and never let anyone call cruelty a family obligation. She would not have wanted me to fund the people who abandoned me and then tried to destroy her final wish. Samantha sent a formal letter telling them to stop contacting me. After that, the messages slowed. I heard through a cousin I barely knew that Mark had to sell his truck. Hannah stopped attending the church group where she had apparently told people I was brainwashed, and their friends were asking uncomfortable questions about the court record. Their image of being misunderstood parents had cracked, and for once, they could not blame me for the sound it made. I didn't celebrate their humiliation. I just refused to rescue them from consequences they had chosen. The estate took months to settle. I kept the house. People told me to sell it because it was worth too much, because memories are not investments, because grief should not make financial decisions. But that house was never just property. It was the place where William taught me to ride a bike in the driveway, where Barbara measured my height on the pantry door, where I cried after my first heartbreak and was handed warm soup instead of advice. I did renovate some rooms, not to erase them, but to let the house breathe again. I turned Grandma Barbara's sewing room into an office. I kept William's old radio on the shelf. And in the backyard, where the rose bushes had grown wild during her final illness, I spent 3 weekends cutting, pruning, and planting until my hands blistered. One morning, while I was kneeling in the dirt, I found the little metal garden marker she had made when I was 10. It said, "Jessica's Roses," in faded paint. I sat there and cried, not because I was broken, but because I realized I had been loved loudly, faithfully, and enough. A few months later, I used part of the inheritance to create a small fund in my grandparents' names for children being raised by relatives after abandonment, addiction, incarceration, or neglect. I called it the Barbara and William Family Fund. The first grant helped a grandmother buy a reliable car so she could take her grandson to school and therapy. The second helped a teenager pay college application fees after her aunt raised her on one income. The third paid for beds, winter coats, and legal paperwork for 2 siblings whose parents had vanished. The fourth helped a young mother raised by her uncle afford counseling after years of believing she was unwanted. Every time I signed a check, I thought about Hannah saying I didn't need $5 million. She was right about one thing. I didn't need it to prove my worth. But I could use it to protect other children from feeling like love had abandoned them completely. About a year after the trial, A letter arrived with no return address. I knew the handwriting before I opened it. Hannah wrote that she was sick, that life had humbled her, that she hoped I could find it in my heart to help with medical bills. There was still no real apology, no mention of the wrong birthday, no admission that the lawsuit was cruel. Just another hand reaching out from the same place of entitlement. For one moment, the little girl in me wanted to believe the letter meant something had changed, but then I read the final sentence. After everything we've been through, you owe us compassion. I folded the letter slowly, placed it in the cedar chest beside the original one she had written when I was a baby, and closed the lid. 2 letters, 30 years apart, both asking someone else to carry the weight of her choices. This time, I refused. I walked outside, stood under the rose trellis, and breathed in the evening air. For most of my life, I thought being abandoned meant something was missing from me. Now I understood the truth. Something had been missing from them. My grandparents filled my life with enough love to build a future, and my parents' lawsuit only proved what Grandma Barbara had taught me all along. Family is not the people who come back when the estate is large. Family is the people who stay when there is nothing to gain but love. I still have both letters. I keep them not because I want to live in pain, but because they remind me of the difference between people who leave and people who love. One letter gave me away. The other tried to make me pay. Neither one gets to define me anymore. So if your biological parents abandoned you, ignored you for 30 years, then came back only to sue you for the inheritance left by the person who actually raised you, what would you do? Would you forgive them, help them, or let them face the consequences of the life they chose? Comment below, because I truly want to know how you would have handled Hannah and Mark Turner.
Our team is committed to creating fictional revenge stories that give viewers drama, emotion, and thoughtful lessons. This video was made only for entertainment and educational purposes. We hope viewers can take away the message that real strength is not proving your worth to others, but knowing it for yourself.